Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space, and thank you so much for joining us for today's event. Design, Power, and Antifascisms. This is co-sponsored and co-organized by Abolition Worlds, the Dark Opacities Lab, and the Department of Design and Computation Arts. Just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube to a private channel today for release later, but we are also located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening across the university. We're also running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting. So for those of you joining us there, if you have any comments or questions, just pop those into the chat and we can read those out a little bit later. Those of you here in the space, the same thing. If you have any comments or questions later, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you. Okay, it's now very much my pleasure. Pass things over to give us an introduction, the director of the Dark Opacities Lab and co-organizer of Abolition Worlds, Dr. Balbir K. Singh. Balbir, it's great to have you.
Thank you all for joining us for Design, Power, and Antifascism.
Just one second up here.
Yeah.
So sorry, we're not hearing you.
Thank you all for joining us for Design, Power, and Antifascisms, co-hosted by the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Society and Cultures Abolition Worlds Working Group, Dark Opacities Lab, and the Department of Design and Computation Arts. We want to first begin by acknowledging that we are situated on Tiohtià:ke, on the unceded lands of the Kanak Nation. Such acknowledgement is in service of the larger Indigenous struggles for land back, and as such, we stand in solidarity with global Indigenous movements from the work of the Mohawk Mothers to the liberation of Palestine. My name is Balbir K. Singh, and I am faculty in the Department of Art History, the Canada Research Chair in Art and Racial Justice, and the Director of Dark Opacities Lab here at Concordia. Today, I am so pleased to introduce three brilliant folks: Sandy Kaltenborn, Kevin Ewan Kit Lowe, and Josh MacPhee, whose work at the intersections of design, community organizing, and social movements inform how we see and envision the horizons for a more radical, just, and liberatory future. I want to thank Kevin, Sandy, and Josh for the time, energy, and care in preparation for such an event, as well as Alan and Matthias for their work in making this event possible, along with the Fourth Space staff. So thank you. Additionally, I want to acknowledge my amazing lab research assistants, Somaya and Temple, for holding it down as usual. In the midst of an exponential rise in global fascism, we gather for the occasion of being in community with three bold and fearless leaders in graphic design who quite literally offer us the visual language of anti-fascism. Does this sound hyperbolic? Maybe, but is it true? Yes. Sandy, Josh, and Kevin are at the forefront of some of the most iconic designs that sustain and hold our social movements down in the 21st century. Their work as part of Image Shift, Loki, Just Seeds, and others has provided forms and images and symbols powerful and iconic in the face of what often feels like the crushing asymmetry of power that fascism represents. It is in their work that we see the imaging and imagining against the police, against borders, against Zionism, against settler occupation, against war, against militarization, and for the abolition of police and prisons, for Palestine, for Black life, for the global majority, for Indigenous survival and dignity, for the horizon and very real possibility of liberation in our time. It is in and through their labor and care for our fragile world that we look and recognize and feel not just less alone or alienated, but we look and recognize and feel the gathering of an anti-colonial and anti-fascist spirit. A spirit that brings people anew to movement building and sustains those who have long been in the struggle. What is more, these three have built models for collaboration and organizing essential for any collective power building in their respective locations, from Jojage, Montreal, to Brooklyn, to Berlin. While being situated in the West, their work speaks to both local and global struggles. In many ways, the work they do practices a model of solidarity politics, one in which they use their craft, skill, and time to build from the ground up. It is through them that we might apprehend some of the visual tools and codes for contemporary forms of internationalism. With that, I will introduce our speakers, Sandy, Kevin, and Josh. Sandy Kaltenborn is a Berlin-based communication designer and teacher with a strong emphasis on communication as a social and political practice. Born in Essen, Germany, and raised in Saudi Arabia and Oman, he studied communication design in Berlin, and I'm not going to butcher its name, so I'm just going to say in Berlin under Alex Jordan, Grapus Collective. In the early 2000s, he co-founded Image Shift, a Berlin-based studio working at the intersection of design, culture production, art, social movements, and urban struggles. He is one of the founders of the tenant initiative, Kotti Co, and has been involved in many anti-racist initiatives, such as Kanak, Attak, and Kein, Menschist illegal.
No human is illegal.
No human is legal, thank you. Kevin Ewan Kitlow is Assistant Professor of Communication Design and Visual Culture in the Department of Design and Computation Arts. He works at the intersections of graphic design, cultural production, and social change with a research focus on publication practices and social movements. His research is invested in exploring the tensions between material and relational studies of design as a means of fostering greater social and political autonomy. Kevin founded the graphic design studio Loki in 2014, working alongside community organizations, nonprofits, cultural and educational institutions, unions, artists, researchers, and activist groups as a part of a broader movement for social change. Kevin holds an MA in typographic design from the London College of Printing and is a member of the Meme Fest Network and the Just Seeds Artists Cooperative. Kevin is the author of Design Against Design, Cause and Consequence of a Dissident Graphic Practice with Set Margins Press. Josh MacPhee is a founding member of the Just Seeds Artists Cooperative and Interference Archive, a public collection of cultural materials produced by social movements situated in Brooklyn. He is the author of an encyclopedia of political record labels, Graphic Liberation, and co-editor of Signal, a journal of international political graphics and culture. He regularly works with community, social justice organizations, and unions, building agitprop and consulting on cultural strategy. With that, I will conclude by thanking you for being with us here in Jojage, Montreal, as well as virtually. The format of today's event will be a panel featuring Sandy, Kevin, and Josh, and we will conclude by leaving time for questions as well from both in-person and virtual audiences. So please join me in welcoming Sandy Kaltenborn, Kevin Lowe, and Josh MacPhee.
Me? No. Whatever. Okay. Hello everybody. I have this tradition of greeting my mother on every start of my lectures, so I'd like to join you greeting my mother. I'll take a selfie if that's okay. Please say hello to my mom. She's 85 years old, and well, I wouldn't call her an activist, but she's involved in an Afghan Women Association. Currently, she's in hospital because she just got a new hip. Okay, having that said, thank you for having me. Thank you, Balbia. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for the people who run this space and everyone who made this possible today. And a special thank goes out to Kevin and to Josh, who've been my friends for more than 2 decades. And yeah, I'm very pleased to be here today. And hello, audience. And supposedly there's a live stream. And I've learned a lot already today that talking about power, this space has a lot of power, a lot of technical power and limitations from my perspective. I've just learned I'm a walker, like I like to walk around in lectures, but I should stick on the green carpet, somebody told me. So, okay, let me see. I got this. This is a clicker. And this is the reference monitor. Oh, there we are. Okay, hello. Next slide. Thank you. So my whole name is actually Alexander Sandy Paul Omar Abdallah Kaltenborn, which is a predominantly long name for a German, which causes currently a lot of issues and problems at the airport, I figured out. Somehow I always get pulled out because my name seems to be too long for the computer. There might be other reasons, which might be related to the name Omar Abdallah, I don't know. So, again, hello, nice to meet you. And this is actually a good summary of why is there this other screen in the screen? Hello, technical superheroes. Oh, okay, now it's gone already. So this is kind of like a good summary why I do graphic design and visual communication in the first place, because we have the pleasure to turn shit into gold, right? So this is an old business card of mine, and there's a friend of mine, and you can see that he's lying on his back. He just had a back injury, and so he's in deep pain. And ignoring the circumstances, we can just take this image and turn it into something nice and friendly. Okay, so you can probably hear already, I'm not a native English speaker. I speak German as my mother language. I forgot all my Farsi, which I learned as a child. Hello, there's the child. And as you can see, there's only half of the chicken today because we decided to only talk for 15 minutes, not 50 minutes we figured out. So I fucked up. I have 170 slides for you guys ahead, and nothing for the vegans and vegetarians. As you can see, there's only half of the chicken, right? So 170 slides. Let's see how that goes. Okay, seems to be a technical issue here. I'm disappointed, guys. Okay, they fixed it already. So a very simple structure of this lecture, and be warned, 170 slides includes long parts of where I'll just be throwing images at you. This might be quite annoying. So this is a test, this is a live test. Somebody's shaking their head in the background. You're my guy. Okay, so stay with me. Okay, so I'll just start with something. You figured that, right? And I will start something. And now I just looked it up in a dictionary. When I say pathetic, it's something very different in German than in English. So this is more something heroic, right? Our design practice has always positioned itself in fundamental opposition to fascist ideologies, to the inhuman politics of the right, and now also to the emerging techno-right. Very heroic. In German, we'd say sehr pathetisch, but that's something very different in English. Besides this, we live in societies in a culture that structurally pushes the intrinsic meaning of work, the joy of creating, the connection with others, the process of learning and growing into an individual dependency with making money. This leads to a deep contradiction in our everyday lives. On one hand, we strive for meaning. On the other hand, we are forced to seek this meaning within a relatively narrow constraints of a market. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? At the same time, today, we're witnessing the expropriation of our visual and cognitive heritage. Common knowledge and collective memory are being privatized, commodified, and severed from their original context and creators in service of economic and political power. Power. We agreed that we tried to do some references to the title, right? There must be order. Ordnung muss sein. Karriereleiter. Karriereleiter. Freedom. Freedom. That's a really good translation, though. Everything can, everything must. Alles kann, alles muss. Self-optimize my ass. Selbst optimiere mich am Arsch. Arsch is a great word, right, in German? It's Arsch. It's butt in English, I believe. Okay, so now we'll throw something like 63 snippets, images from my visual practice from the last 2 decades, of 2 decades now. Is it 3? 3, fucking A. Before I start, so I run the studio, as Bobby just said, it's called Menschist, and the subtitle is called Visual Communication, Other Misunderstandings. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit later, how we understand communication, the function of communication. But I'd like to show these 63 slides without any words and further info. But before that, I would like to quote an old friend of mine, also from Grapus, Vincent Perrotet, and he says, "Every image is social. Every image was made to socialize people. Interestingly, though, one could say that there are non-social images in the sense that they tend to create a distance between people. And there are images that foster closeness, that invite conversation and exchange. So some images are made to separate people, others bring them together. So when we create social or cultural images, we do this in order to spark relationships and discussions." I think it's a fantastic quote. Attention. Thank you for hanging out. The clicker works all over the space. This is something like a mission statement. This goes ahead before I show a few examples. I conceive my design practice as a fundamental social practice. It positions itself in a critical opposition to dominant notions of design that prioritize form, innovation, and the creation of commodified objects and spaces. My focus lies in the social, from the intimate, everyday interactions to broader political structures of power. I seek to develop a visual and verbal language that articulates critique through poetic means and emancipatory image politics. Design in this sense is not about creating objects, but about enabling relationships, spaces of communication, and shared meaning. Aesthetics emerge through the social use and through a dialogical, democratic approach of making. Okay, we're nearly done. So I'll show you two quick examples of my work and one a little bit longer. I'll do it very fast. So this is a poster series made, I think, in 2008. This was in the context of the G8 summit, an economic summit in Germany. And you can imagine there's a lot of political posters out there, but the political group who asked me to design posters, I convinced them to do something more subtle. Because when you look around, if you close your eyes and you think of a political poster, I would imagine that most of the images which arises are about struggle, fight, strength, opposition. And from my perspective, there's not really enough space for ambivalency, double meaning, contradictions on these things. And these three posters which discuss, sorry, I'm supposed not to move. Can I move? Where's? I think I can move. Anyway, so obviously this is about gender, this is about borders, and this is about flexibility, taking this as an example. This is reflecting working conditions in opposition to, let's say, my parents' generation, which had usually a 9-to-5 job. Nowadays, people are probably self-employed, they're flexible, but flexibility is something great, but it can be very harmful at the same time. Same image idea, similar image idea, double meaning with the band as a border, because a lot of political posters, like anti-racist posters we see, they portray migrants, refugees as victims and not as people who are actually taking action, crossing the border. And we know all these constraints at the borders all over the world, people will find their way to their luck. Can you say that? That's what we're seeking for. Okay, next example. This is a poster for a May Day demonstration. We have a long tradition of May Day demonstrations in Berlin, Germany. The traditional ones are from the unions, which are actually not really demonstrations. They're more street fairs for sausages and beer. And then we have on the radical left demonstrations, which are militant and very loud. But a little while ago, in late 2000s, there was a movement sparking from Italy, actually, called Euro May Day. And this was more about a parade and celebrating our resistance or our struggles, if you want so. And this is a part of a poster series which reflects on our working conditions of self-employed people. So it asks, it's not a question, it says ich streik, which means I strike. So the question actually, how do self-employed people go on strike? So you tell me, usually the easiest strike we do, or our body does, is to get ill, right? To get sick. Another possibility would be taking drugs, right? Or over-identify with work and work until we fall apart, right? So, and then you see a picture of a sleeping room or a bedroom, so you say in English. And there's a protest sign, a picket sign, and it says precarity, work, and daily life. So we're trying to bring, in this wording, in the text work, bring different perspectives together, which actually are, to some extent, contradictory, and maybe make more clear on the other one. So the second one reads, I stress, which means, yeah, I stress, ich stress. And it reads career, ego, and solidarity. So try to get the idea of career and an ego together with solidarity. The last one reads, I pause. And it says love, money, and self-exploitation. Right? So we try to embrace the complexities of daily life and not to flatten it down in some, simplified political slogan. Right? That's the idea. And my belief is that a progressive or even the left is strong when we are able to ingrain ambivalency, problems, and all these things which actually don't fit in a fist or in a flag into our political struggles and our visual culture. Yeah. And in addition, this picture of a parade, we printed the half of the amount of posters, probably like each poster is a copy of, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 of each poster. And then we additionally printed empty posters and stick them to the streets in order to engage, to have people engaged and to react on these empty posters. So a lot of graffiti people wrote, a lot of penises were drawn on them. Of course, you know how people are. Beautiful they are. So this is not a project, actually. This is a brief glimpse into a 12 years practice of mine. But Björn mentioned it, I was part of a tenant initiative in Berlin. This is an intersection called Kotti Co. This is where I live, right here. Very beautiful apartment, very nice view. Visit me, stop by, drop me a line when you're in Berlin. And so we're in the center, in the heart of Berlin. Berlin was a divided city. And as in so many other places, gentrification hit. But this intersection is a super diverse urban space. It's a good example of what we call forest urban planning. It has a strong migrant community, mainly so-called guest workers. That's how we call migrants in Germany, guest workers. I used to call them. So Germany is the country everyone else invites their guests to sit at the table, but Germany calls them guest workers, right? So it's also strong art scene, counterculture, subcultural scene, a lot of clubs, social movements. We have a huge drug scene there. So yeah, a lot of alcohol and drugs on the street. A lot of poverty is visible. It's also a transportation hub. We have 2 subways running and a big intersection. And so yeah, this is the slide for the explosion of the rents. And you can see here that the rent actually between 2010 and 20 doubled, not even more than doubled. So it's quite a dramatic situation, which puts especially working class and lower middle class under a lot of pressure. And as we know that this housing question, it's not isolated from other fields. I was just talking to Alan about this earlier, that we see that the students who come to our schools, they differ in comparison to 10 years or 12 or 20 years ago, because only middle class kids or rich people can afford to send their students to a city like Berlin anymore. So this changes, which has a big impact on teaching. So the starting point in 2011 was an increasement of the rent, and it caused a lot of problems on most of my neighbors because they're on social housing subsidies, and basically the social welfare center said, well, move out or find a cheaper place, right? And of course, there's racism, poverty, and marginalization, all these things which these neighborhoods are affected by. So small group, big problem. And so the main questions in the beginning were, how do we stop the rising rents, particularly in social housing? How do we re-municipalize the private housing stock? So most of this area you just saw in the picture was privatized to an investment firm close to BlackRock, you probably heard. There's another hedge fund. And then how do we create an open and inclusive protest? So this is a super diverse neighborhood. So when we put out visual artifacts, any kind of language or design is exclusive. It's exclusive, So how to design something which has very little aesthetic distinction? Now that was a big question, but also in terms of language, verbal language, and the format of the protest itself. So how do we develop a discursive public visibility and power? And the general question, of course, was how do we push politics towards a real social housing provision? So pretty big tasks for a small group. And I'm not going to go into this. Of course, we're talking mainly, the starting point is graphic design. Actually, that's where we met many years ago. This was the base. But our practice, and you will probably see this in the presentations of my colleagues a second later, we're not talking about only graphic design and imagery and aesthetics. We're talking about all different kind of design practices, and some are probably not even design practice at its core. So I'm just giving you one little graphic design example here, again to the intersection. So one of the problems we have here, I just briefly mentioned, is that we have a lot of negative image about this intersection. So these are cutouts from newspapers, and the headlines are super negative. So I'll just read a few to you. Drugs, violence, and crime. Cottbusser Tor remains a hotspot. Residents desperate not to play a safe place at Cottbusser Tor. Symbol of Berlin's failed drug policy. Berlin most dangerous corner. So a lot of negative headlines pounded on our neighborhood. And the first reaction when we started our initiative from the politicians and even from the media saying, well, who wants to live in this shithole in the first place, right? So it was, we first had to make an argument why we want to stay and not be displaced. So I came up with this fantastic idea. I found out later that somebody else had this idea before me. No, just kidding. I'm picking this example because actually it's a good example because the design work here is actually nothing. It's just American typewriter and looking at Milton Glaser's I Love New York original design, right? So it's a very simple design. And so Kotti is this intersection, and there's the original, and reads, I love Kotti, stop the rising rents at Kottbusser in German and Turkish, and then the contact address. And so this little sticker is the way how I like to look at these things. They contain graphic design, communication design, and even strategic design. So how can we look at this? So it's called like 3 layers of strategic communication design. So we have the graphic design, which is the sticker itself. It's just a 10 by 10 centimeter sticker. And the design is inspired, as I just mentioned, by Milton Glaser. It has a very low threshold, warm, bold. The communication design level is first a declaration of love, then the problem. You know, there would be 1,000 other ways to do it. Usually we'd say, the rent is too high, stop it. We did something else. We said, we love this place. And then we communicated the problem, right? So, and it's very lightweight, very easy to distribute. And then when you pass these stickers out, right, you pass them out here, virtually, people have to interact, they have to take them off. And by building this relationship, they kind of build some kind of relationship with our protest. You know, so they're not just stickers, they're very interesting media formats. And Kevin has a beautiful sticker book in the back. So, and then another thing we tend to forget that when we talk to an audience, we also talk to ourselves. So we also had to tell ourselves that this is a great neighborhood, right? It's not only the audience, the city, the media, the politicians, but also ourselves, because if it's continuously negative information about one neighborhood, then eventually you even believe that it's a shithole, but it's not. The strategic design layer is, of course, we are implementing counter images and some kind of narrative, and we're ensuring the just read it yourself. And we're creating a continuous visibility. I will just move a bit faster and I'll show you how it was implemented. And you can see a little bit the diversity of people who were in the protest here, all different cups we have. It is a flea market, right? I mean, this place is full of tech, but the color management of the slides, I'm not so convinced. This is quite an important picture. It's one of our demonstrations, something I've been reflecting on a lot of times. So we have these stickers which quote I, and as you can see, we have a banner. For some reason, we have it in English. I don't know. It would be wir in German. Wir lieben den Kotti, not we love Kotti. It says, we love Kotti and we hate rent. And it's kind of a reflection on how does the individual fit into the collective, or what does the individual has to leave out in order to operate within a collective. So it's about individuality and collectivity. I hope we can dig into this a bit deeper later. So I'll give you another 36 slides, and then I'm done. How many minutes? I'm good? Okay. So these are just some images I picked randomly from about a 10-year protest, and then I'll come to the end. Oh, we have a Hello Kotti instead of... Sorry, where are the streamers there? We have a Hello Kotti, not a Hello Kitty, of course. The kids loved it. So 10 years later, and you could probably imagine, I mean, I was just talking to Arne about this, and because last time he was in Berlin was something around 2010, 11, and this was kind of like the situation when the rents were skyrocketing, and this was also the moment when we founded our initiative in 2011, but we were not alone. There were other initiatives, and this developed to something like a social movement, meaning a dynamic which was able to include lots of different skills, practices, actors in the city. So it built up a lot of momentum and power over this period of time. And I showed you these tiles earlier with the design practices, but this is actually a bit more interesting. This is what I call a multi-layer transformative design strategy, and actually is just describing or trying to sketch out different layers of engagement which we were engaged in order to build up this power. So I'm not going to dig into this, but I think it's pretty clear that a sticker itself or one initiative itself can't change the world. We have to collaborate and network with all levels, you know, so even we're collaborating with the government. And 10 years later, yeah, you need to be able to celebrate also, right? So this is another fantastic infographic by Sandy Kaltenborn. It shows kind of like the material effectiveness of our initiative and the numbers of households positively impacted. And so when we started, it was just about our intersection, but this was about social housing. So it was immediately about 110,000 flats in Berlin. And later we had a few referendums. It was affecting about 420,000 flats. We have approximately 1.9 million flats in Berlin. So it's a pretty big chunk. And this is a list of our little victories. So we actually managed also to remunicipalize all the buildings in our neighborhood. We passed a law. We have more subsidies for poor people in social housing. There were further remunicipalizations, housing blocks all over the city. Approximately 3.2 billion euros in state funds were allocated to social housing supply at the end of the story, at the end of this lecture. Yeah, these are all the housing blocks you can see, which were all private and now are in public hand again. And maybe some of you guys heard about this. We started a second referendum. The first referendum was in 2015 on the Berlin housing companies and social housing, but we kicked another one off in 2021 on expropriation, which sounds a bit crazy, but our constitution allows that, funny-wise. And our constitution doesn't say that Germany has to be a capitalist system. It can be also something else, right? So, and nobody believed in the beginning when we started, but at the end in this referendum, about 60% of the Berliners voted for the expropriation of big housing companies, which own more than 3,000 flats, right? So we won this victory, then the government changed. And what do politicians do if they don't like the idea? They say, well, we're going to establish a working group. And we were not allowed as an initiative to send any of our members to this working group. It turned out very bad for them. Their own people said, 13 experts, the working group decided that expropriation of Berlin large housing companies was not only legal, it was appropriate. And the funny thing is, you know, if you can't just expropriate people, you have to give them money. But we've developed a system where it doesn't harm our city budget. So it's doable, it's just a matter of power. And now the government is playing on time, and my colleagues and many, many other people are now working with lawyers together, and we're writing our own law, and we're going to pass a second referendum, most likely next year, to actually expropriate these housing companies. Oh. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to everyone that helped pull this together. I'm not going to repeat everything again, but I see you all, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you to all of you for coming out. I'm not as funny as Sandy, but I'll try, I guess. Oh, wait, we're way ahead here. Okay. So this first image here, I'm gonna talk about two things very quickly, kind of like Sandy, and then one long thing. But I don't have 170 slides. I have 25. So your eyes can take a little bit of a rest before Kevin barrages. Less is more, man. So in preparing for this, and then on the train ride up yesterday with Sandy, I remembered that. And I dug out this image that, because I think it's relevant to this conversation. In 1993, so 32 years ago, I was living in Washington, D.C., and someone was spray painting swastikas and SS lightning bolts all over the city. And for weeks, people had been trying to figure out what to do about it. People had been crossing them out, and then they would get painted over. People were putting stickers on top of them. And then me and a group of friends had this idea. It just dawned on someone that the SS lightning bolts look like the SS in the band Kiss's logo. So we cut out stencils of the 4 members of Kiss and went around and painted the stencils of Paul Stanley and, over the faces, over the swastikas, and then put KI in front of all of the SS's. And actually it stopped the racist graffiti because they got so confused by like all of their Nazi propaganda getting turned into advertisements for a very queer glam rock band that it kind of like undermined the original message successfully. And I think that part of the import of that story is that sometimes the solution isn't the most direct one or the most obvious. And then also, kind of like Sandy, sometimes humor goes a really long way. I, unlike these two, have no formal training in design at all. Actually, I have no attachment to the field of design personally. I don't really care because I haven't really invested in it. So I don't really think about myself as a designer, and I don't really think about myself that much as an artist either. I think that these are two fields or domains that have been kind of rarefied in different ways. Art has become the place of quote unquote self-expression. Design is really the purview of the expression of commerce in the state. And what neither of these things do is provide a space for any kind of collective self-organized expression. And so what I'm interested in is the expression of people who are organizing to transform their lives. So like social movement, cultural production. So I think of myself as a social movement cultural producer or cultural worker. I don't really think of myself as a designer or an artist, although those are fine terms. But I think it's interesting that we don't have a space, and I think that there's a cost to not having named a space that we hold for this kind of expression. That these things get shoved into political art or activist design, in which political and activists become the kind of thing that's got stuck on top of the dominant apparatus of art or design, which does a certain violence to an actual ability to come up with or think about how we collectively express ourselves. And that's a long intro to, this is the only slide I think that has things that people need to read, which is that one of the really key components, I think, of this idea of movement culture is that authorship becomes not particularly important in this context. And so I think Avram here says a very clear and direct thing, which is that you can design something, but it's the people who enact it that make it real. They turn it into something that matters to other people. You can make something that can sit on your desktop for the rest of your life. It can be the coolest thing in the world, but if no one cares, so what? This is the other little thing that I put in, and I made this in 2016, and kind of like Sandy's I Love Kotti, this is directly a reference to Elwazitsky's Red Wedge, defeats the white, trying to bring something from 1914, or is it 1919? I think it's 1919 actually. To 2019, and the enduring value of these historical examples, but also that I find it's really interesting. The more I make work, and the more I realize that the less that I author it, the more that other people take it up and turn it into other things. And so this is just an image I came across of someone who had taken this design I made and then embroidered it into a t-shirt. Which is very cool, and the wedge is all a tongue, yeah. But really what I'm going to talk about is the campaign to close or to shut Rikers Island, which is the most notorious jail in New York and in the United States, really. And I've been involved in that campaign since 2016, so for about a decade. And there have been many, many campaigns to shut Rikers Island. I could go into a long history of Rikers itself. Very briefly, it's named after a Dutch man named Riker, who was a slave owner. He turned the island into a way station during the Fugitive Slave Act for people who were capturing escaped enslaved peoples and bringing them back to the South. It has a very, very brutal, evil history. Its landmass has, I think, been increased by fourfold. Most of that by people who are incarcerated there, adding and having to basically like moving trash and building out the island in order to build more incarceration facilities on top of it. Like the entire history of it is just diabolical. And there's been many, many campaigns to shut it. But in 2016, we launched a campaign that's been the most successful so far. And the first thing that I did for this campaign is that I created these fan hands, these foam fan hands that are fists, in which everyone could kind of embody the power of the raised fist, which Sandy dislikes. But actually was really, really powerful and meaningful in this context. It created a sense of social cohesion. It has this kind of comic aspect. You have all these people who are putting this like right hand on their left hand. And then these things have circulated where every demonstration around Rikers, someone shows up with one of these hands. We've reprinted them multiple times, and they just keep circulating and keep showing up. Because I think they embody at this point, what is now decades and decades of resistance to this jail. And then the next thing that I did is the campaign needed a t-shirt design. And I was thinking, you know what? I've been meeting with the members of the campaign, which are mostly people who were formerly incarcerated on Rikers or family members of people who are in Rikers now. And I was like, we're gonna design a t-shirt together. Show up to meetings, and they're like, you know what? We don't actually really care. You seem like you're pretty good at this. What we care about is like, how do you make t-shirts? Like, how do you actually screen print t-shirts? That's useful to us. You can do the design. We don't really care about that part. So I partnered with a local print shop in Brooklyn, and the members of the campaign came and we all printed the shirts together, and they learned how to screen print because that was the part that was meaningful to them. And then very quickly, actually, in 2017, we forced the mayor to commit to closing Rikers Island. That, of course, has ended up being much more complicated than it seemed at the time, but the campaign wanted something to celebrate this moment of success. And so we designed this commemorative fabric that's kind of based on the designs of traditional African commemorative fabrics, in which we screen printed yardage of this fabric and then brought it out. This is the Afropunk Festival in Brooklyn in 2017, where we had yardage of this, and people could cut pieces of it off and then make bandanas with it, sew it into clothing, turn it into all different kinds of agitprop. And part of my work with this campaign has always been like, how do we push the limits of sort of the traditional understanding of what like a political poster is or what propaganda can be? We sort of expanded the campaign a little bit to try to include, there's a interesting tension in New York between the city, which is so dominant, and then the rest of the state. And so you're trying to organize around incarceration issues. The issues are really different upstate than downstate. And so we tried to build this broader campaign around this slogan, cut, shut, invest, which is still in play, although it's suppressed to the Rikers work again. But the first thing that we did is we did these giant scissors. So we did these 2 foot by 3 foot scissors, which we screen printed onto cardboard and then had people cut out with this idea of like cutting the number of people in prison, shutting facilities, and investing in the communities most affected by mass incarceration. And then we have these sort of incredible demonstrations where you have hundreds of people with these giant scissors, just snipping them. And I had been doing all of this history and training work with the organizers about the history of political graphics. And so part of the reason why we came to this image and to these scissors were, one, the French Revolution and the guillotine. So like you have a bunch of people with these scissors, it's this implicit threat, you know, do what we're demanding or snip, snip. But also that the backbone of organizing around incarceration in the United States has always been women, and particularly Black women. And scissors are a domestic object. They represent women's work. And so to make these small sort of demure domestic objects really big and turn them into this implicit threat had this whole feminist undertone. We made really big scissors out of the plasticore. And then since 2023, we relaunched the Rikers campaign because right now we have a mayor who is a former police officer, Mayor Adams, who is basically, profoundly authoritarian, arguably many fascist characteristics. But he's done everything possible to undermine the commitment to shutting Rikers Island. And so we relaunched this campaign in which we chose these colors, red, yellow, and black, to say this is an emergency. And the dominant image that we use over and over again is this skull that directly comes from like sort of hazardous materials visual lexicon, to basically say like, this is an emergency, Rikers is death. And then we've been reproducing this kind of imagery over and over again and created like basically a whole kind of aesthetic that unifies the movement around this iconography. And in the field of criminal justice reform, as they call it, it really stands out in the city, and it's gotten picked up and reproduced in mainstream newscasts all over the place. And so we've sort of like allowed its simplicity and power to resonate, and people just reproduce and recreate the images for us. And one of the big things that I was working on this on the train too, it's an immense number of people are being injured at Rikers. Since Mayor Adams took office, 38 people have died on the island or after just being released from the island to try to go to hospital. In 2025, already 5 people have died. 3 people have died in the last 2 weeks. And so I produce one of these graphics and posters for every single person who died. And then we produce these and we distribute them at every action. So people hold up remembrances of and make present all of the people that have been murdered, or what we call death by Rikers. And I don't know, if I hit this again, this is a video, but I don't know if it's gonna play. Is there a way to, no? Okay. I didn't do that. I didn't touch anything. Okay.
Hi, y'all.
So I'm going to reenact that video. It's up there. Basically, this is one of these advertising trucks. So we rented these advertising trucks, and I created animated GIFs that actually, this truck drove around the court, downtown Manhattan court district. And it has the mayor's head on it, and his face gets covered and obscured with the names of everyone that's died in Rikers since he took office. And then that just drives around the court buildings in downtown Manhattan for hours. And it's important remembrance for the people that have died. It's a poke in the face of the mayor, but it also is really mobilizing for the people that are part of the campaign to see their work traversing and being sort of broadcast out into the city. And then it's interesting, like I don't really have any formal training in art any more than I have design, but historically, if I've been anything, I've been a printmaker. It's funny, when Sandy and I first met, I brought him some screen prints. And he was like, these are very quaint. How many of these did you make? 20? Like, what are you gonna think you're gonna do with these? But now what's interesting is that I feel like as a printmaker, I've arrived because I designed these door hangers for the campaign, and we've printed 750,000 of them. We have teams going out every week, every day, and knocking on tens of thousands of doors. So far, about 250,000 doors have been knocked on. So these get put out, and for people that aren't home, these get hung on their doorknobs. Most of them have been distributed at NYCHA Housing, New York City Housing Authority, this is public housing in the city. And part of this is about building a alternative power base to the mayor of the city. The New York City politics are very complex. The mayor, who is a former police officer, like I said, is Black. He's the first modern mayor of New York City that won the election without the majority of the white vote. And part of that is that his base is in part public housing. So by going directly to public housing and sort of disorganizing his base and saying that this is actually what the mayor's doing, it's part of the campaign to make sure that Rikers is an issue that has to get dealt with anyone that wants to run for office in the city. That it's unavoidable, that it's something that you have to engage with. Every time you go into a public housing project, someone's gonna ask you about it. And I think that's most of what I have. Yeah, here's Katal Center is the organization that I work for in New York City. Just Seeds is a group that both Kevin and I are part of. And then this image here is also supposed to move, but I guess that's not happening. And this is all, I did a publication with a friend, and that's all images of the barricades that were built at the encampments for Palestine. So just dozens of images of just the physical architecture of the barricade building and the way that proliferated around the world, which is kind of fun to watch for a little while, but we can't, so I apologize. But thank you, and Kevin.
Hi, everyone. So thank you both for those presentations. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Balbir. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Fourth Space. After those presentations, I feel like I just want to chat. These are old friends of mine, but we live in different places, don't get to see each other very, very often. And so it's very special for me to be able to bring you here. I'm really honored. I said this to Sandy, although he gets a little shy maybe, but like Sandy is like a mentor to me. I met him 24 years ago at Concordia. at a conference where the poster is still up in the design department that we need to go see. Your name's on there. But that's when I first met him, and that's when I began my career, I guess, as a practicing designer and as a cultural producer, because maybe not an activist designer. I don't know. I don't like that. I don't like that label anymore. You're right. I skipped. Can I go? Oh, back. Okay. So we had talked earlier, but we were very last minute, all three of us, in making our slides. We did it on the train, but we had talked about kind of defining certain terms. We have these three provocative words in terms of design, power, and anti-fascism, and we're trying to think about how do we understand these terms. And I do identify a designer. I care a lot about design. I teach in design, so hopefully I should care. This is a quote by Dori Tunstall, who was the Dean of Design, design anthropologist, previously at OCAD. I'm not sure where she is now. But she has this rap. She calls it the design anthropology rap, which is really cool. And one of the lines is design translates values into tangible experience. And what I like about that, beyond the kind of like very high placement in terms of design in the hierarchy of power, is this notion of tangible experience. So we've talked a little bit about aesthetics, why they matter, why they might not. I actually think the actual tangible material experience of that is actually really, really powerful, but it's connected to those values, right? So what can I mean by that, right? So this is a poster that I designed for the Festival International de la Imagen in Manizales, Colombia during the pandemic. So unfortunately I wasn't able to go. But the design of a spreadsheet, it's not something we think about a lot, but like these grids, these lines, these are very, very much like the design of the 21st century is the spreadsheet. And we don't think, and how does that, in terms of a sensory experience, when we open up our Excel or our Google Drive, and how that impacts our emotional state and our way of thinking and the possibilities and imagination we might have in order to order things in a certain way, how does the design operate there? So it's not even about the content, and that's why I think it's interesting thinking about design as this kind of material practice, the material of the spreadsheet, and then being able to fuck it up for this poster, which is about like kind of the bureaucracy of universities and the natural world, was again a materially satisfying thing to just like distort the spreadsheet in Illustrator. And then here, we can talk about the kind of use of simultaneous contrast to really kind of like burn our eyes a little bit. And of course, it's also a historical reference. And at a certain point, these historical references for people that are perhaps bathed in that kind of culture, this is a reference to Robert Indiana's Love sculpture in Philadelphia, which people may have seen, but also to General Idea's work during the AIDS pandemic, which replaced the word love with AIDS in their graphics, and brought up to a contemporary time to think about how ACAB acts as a shorthand for both love and resistance. And at that point, you know, some of those things, if those ideas are burnt into your head in terms of, let's say, contemporary art, or perhaps within, you know, certain movement cultures around AIDS, then these become actually sensory experiences to you in terms of your recognition of it. Similarly, thinking about the design of the panopticon. So this is a concept illustrated by Foucault, which we're all maybe pretty familiar with. We talked a lot about abolition and incarceration. But what's also really interesting, I think, with this image is when people see it, because it's kind of turned on its head a little bit, we see the transatlantic slave ships, right? Maybe. As other iconic images that might be part of our image culture. So these are kind of the material questions I'm talking about before we even get to the quote unquote content or subject matter of design. And I think that's worthwhile to investigate because it shapes those kinds of experiences. When we talk about power, I was thinking of it in terms of very simple, it's almost a dictionary definition, but like what is the measure of an individual or collective agency or capacity to act to affect our own conditions or the environment around us? So yeah, simple understanding of power. How can we actually act and influence things around us? We might also understand it now as the capacity to adapt and to change, adapt to changing conditions, such as entrenched and normalized fascisms. And thinking about how do we act in this way in response to maybe some of the mobilizing and organizing work that we've done before, how does that might be need to change? how might we, and this is a lot of why I'm very thankful for being part of the lab, the Dark Opacities lab, in thinking through this notion of visibility, opacity, especially around the idea of design. So thinking about how do we persist under fascist conditions, and maybe through obfuscation or through opacity. So that's something I'm interested in about as well. Also looking at sort of repression in China as well, and in different ways to different movements there in terms of like non-confrontational resistance. And then the final thing is that many designers have like no understanding of power. Well, I say little. We talk a lot about innovation. We talk a lot about individual adaptations, individual innovations that work. Very little about collective understanding of that, and then also not seeing it as like, if we innovate something, then it's going to make things better, not understanding the power dynamics that suppress those innovations. This is work from 2015 for May Day. So there you go. Sandy and I both, and I'm sure Josh, have all made a few hundred May Day posters. So this is for May Day in 2015. And this is actually with some Just Seeds comrades based in Toronto. And the reason I'm putting it under this kind of power nomenclature is the ability that like screen printing, like we were saying, not necessarily your design, but just screen printing, is this enactment where your environment is immediately changed. You pull that screen and all of a sudden you have a print. And to have that kind of agency is actually a really powerful thing. So just some examples of people making communally the graphics for the May Day protest in Toronto. The focus was on austerity at that time. This kind of very key is under a campaign banner called Unite Against Austerity. Banner painting, using these kind of graphic setups that I had provided and allowing then people to take those things apart and then reconstruct their own banners, placards, bandanas, etc. And of course then the social use of that image in the street. And then anti-fascism. So anti-fascisms are social movements that oppose fascism and can also describe strategies and tactics. So I'm going to get, when I talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific story here in Quebec, Montreal, and maybe connect it to some of the things that are happening now and some of the tensions around a lot of the things that we've already talked about in terms of community organizing and design's role around that. I think it's important, if we're talking about anti-fascism, to also understand fascism not as an established power structure, but as a social movement in and of itself. I think that's how we might define it differently than an established authoritarian government. So fascism is driven by a populist social movement. It is actually in movement. It is like continually regenerating itself and continually mobilizing itself. So in terms of like relations of power related to a movement versus relations of power related to perhaps an established government, a city, policy, et cetera, maybe there's, at least before we had, fascists installed into the higher offices of power, there was a necessity, I think, in Trump's first presidency here locally in Quebec to try and actually stop that movement. This is a key point that I think kind of marks that struggle. That struggle obviously lasted well before that, started well before that, but I think transformed in this moment. Do people here locally know what I'm talking about? I don't want to speak too much about it. But simply put, for those that are either watching on Zoom elsewhere, in January 29th, 2017, so we have to understand this is about a year after Trump was elected in the US, that Alex Bissonnette went to the Quebec Islamic Center in Quebec City, killed 6 people and seriously injured 5 other worshippers. This is a really tragic moment that we've tried to commemorate year on year on year, but I can also feel that memory slipping a little bit. Less than a month and a half after that, local far-right fascist groups, La Meute, emerged from the online space on Facebook, where they had about 45,000 followers, to actually take the streets of Montreal for the first time. This was a huge affront to activists and organizers in the city of Montreal, and I don't know if we were particularly ready as we were still grieving what was happening. So contrary to, like, we're gonna have so many great discussions because, like, sometimes a good, simple slogan is useful. Shortly after the, I guess, terrorist attack, the slaughter, I created these simple graphics because of the necessity. We were seeing how far-right groups were mobilized, which is like super disgusting to see, but actually mobilized by those murders and how they're preparing to take space based on that. And so we here in Montreal, we're trying to counter protest, but we didn't have a lot of imagery available at that time. So I quickly, with a bunch of collaborators, made these two graphics. The Arabic, for those that speak Arabic, I might translate this wrongly, but it kind of says, we love you all, in a way, with sort of in a plurality. So we had these placards which had that, the Make Racists Afraid Again statement on one side, repeated and repeated and repeated because of this idea of we really still believe there's more of us than there are of them. And then on the other side, we had this kind of memorial image, which was necessary because this is less than a month after these people had been killed. The idea was that we could also turn the placards around, depending on who we were facing, whether it was the actual far-right mob or if it was our allies. At the same time, it was kind of funny because obviously, like, showing anything to a bunch of racists in Arabic, over and over is actually pretty scary to them. So that was fun too. So this is just some images. There was not very many images. This was a very, very quick turnaround, but this was one of the demonstrations in front of the city hall in terms of like direct confrontations with the far right, with La Meute and Pegida, which was imported from Europe at the time. There's my friend Anna, my friend Lolo. This is maybe seems like a little bit of a funny thing, but so at one of these moments, so this was happening all throughout the few months following that attack. There was a lot of like street confrontations going on, and thankfully a lot of the kind of anti-fascist organizing also had people that were, really used to street politics, used to defending themselves, used to protecting themselves, and used to confronting, confronting fascists from a long history of things that have happened here in Canada, Toronto specifically with ARA, anti-racist action, but also here in Montreal and in Quebec. But I sit on this image for a second because we had basically blocked City Hall, which is where La Meute, they were trying to, at the time, there was a federal, because of the attack, there was a federal policy that was trying to be put in place, or federal law to denounce Islamophobia. And they were reacting to that. So they were trying to get to City Hall to actually say that that was an assault on their free speech. This is when a lot of we see these kind of connections. The argument, they had all the signs saying free speech, like related to that. But here we have like a bunch of like blocked up people, like black blocked up people. We were there occupying that space for a long time. We got hungry. We ordered a pizza from Pizza. And I just thought it was really funny to see all these like masked up black bloc protesters bringing us pizza. And the pizza was great. It was like really nice, really good. The pizza, like, yeah, thumbs up. But it's gonna point, I think it's funny, but I think there's also something is flipping in my head here in thinking, okay, how does this pizza guy feel? Driving downtown, this is around, Old Port, through a bunch of crowds, through a bunch of cop lines to deliver us pizza, and then like being met by a bunch of blocked up people. Like, he's probably happy, I don't know. But like, what is the perception of anti-fascist organizing? So after those posters and other things, it became a design that, because we had the screens already made, we started printing onto different clothing in an attempt to think through some of that idea of like who is represented by anti-fascist struggle. And so I think it's also partly driven by, like 3-4 years earlier, I was working in fashion for the first time. at a company called Essence, and like I started getting interested in fashion. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take all the stuff that I was doing before and then just like turn it into clothing, you know, and do like fashion shoots with my friends. This is my dear friend Sophie, and so I was kind of like starting to just think through how to, like, you know, you wouldn't think that. I mean, maybe you would, but I don't think then. Maybe now, I think it's more possible. But like, our anti-fascist organizing would do a fashion photo shoot, you know? And we had like basically upcycled a bunch of stuff that we'd got at Value Village. So all sorts of different designs. And then those were also like distributed and sold and proliferated. So I think one thing we're seeing is this kind of like social reproduction of images that, you know, through Sandy's work, through Josh's work, and through mine, where we might see that division between like design and art, for example. This is Bruce Lee, the boxer. And of course, it was also printed up, wheat pasted, screen printed. This is in the Journal L'Humanité in France. And yeah, so to connect, maybe if people are interested, they can just take, like, these are all, there's also like all sorts of stuff there that you guys can take. So maybe if anyone wants, this is something that was produced at that point as well, working directly with Montréal Antifascist. And again, trying to think through how are these normally received? And I don't think, and as I'm showing this work, I don't want us to think that there was not like a ton of failures associated with all this work either. That's an important thing to do. But for a second, I was like, okay, what if we step away from like red and black for just like 1 second, you know? What if we use this? Oh, is it still there? Oh yeah. What if we add yellow? What if we add this cute little cactus that I only found out much later was designed by Sandy's intern in Berlin. I saw it while I was visiting Berlin. I was like, oh, this is cool, and I stole it. And then I just realized I stole it from Sandy's intern. So the idea, when I saw it, it was placed in a lot of houses, and I think the idea was just if a fascist comes to your door, like throw a cactus at them. Simple, effective. Is that it?
The beautiful thing is that it doesn't show the fascist. The image, the cactus falling on the head is in our head.
Yeah,
Behind our
yeah,
eyes.
it's activated.
Right, that's the beautiful
It's like a comic book, you know?
It's like a communication strategy.
Yeah. And then also thinking about representations of like who is behind that. This is an image actually done by Zola, artist here in Montreal, and thinking about, okay, how do we negotiate that though, right? Like how do we also still present the symbols, the energy, the militancy that I think is important in confronting these fascists while at the same time not necessarily doing things that are alienating. I don't know if that was successful, and I'm gonna get to a bit more of that later. How do we use the term, how do we tie the anti-fascist work that we were doing, which was largely around working with like migrant justice groups as well, in terms of a broader movement of like welcoming refugees, which I think was slightly more accessible to like a liberal, progressive base. But of course, we were also dealing with like literally confrontations on the street and trying to take space in the street. This one is great for those that know Gudetama. He's the depressed egg. I identify a lot with him. And so I was starting to see this kind of creativity that was happening. On one level, you have a banner that states very clearly the slogan that I was using before, "Make racists afraid again." This is a very big defensive banner. So literally to protect people's identities, protect against also like, for people that are protest savvy, like a defensive banner, while at the same time seeing much more playful imagery like Gudetama going, "Ugh, racists are the worst, man." And then these are some of the larger mobilizations that were called by Montréal Antifasciste at the time. And this is an important image to me because it was a really big demonstration. I don't remember exactly the date, but you can sort of see in the image that there was a cross-sectional kind of group of people that had come to cross because they were seeing the threat that was being posed by the the groups like La Meute, Storm Alliance, Pegida, et cetera, that were all taking up space. I mean, if people remember that time, they were going to the border and beating up people that were trying to cross over at the Lacolle border and Roxham Road. We went there to block them, you know, so there was, it was a certain time, and I'm like, it was really actually pretty triggering to go back and think about this stuff over the last week. Because I'm like, oh yeah, that was like a long time ago, but it was also like right after Trump was elected the first time. Yeah, and then sort of just this confrontational space that was happening in the streets, you know, pretty much weekly at that point. So also speaking in terms of like, then I translated that cactus into something else with my friend Lolo, who did a lino cut out of it. And I think the reason I'm showing this is thinking in terms of especially the idea of like an anti-fascist neighborhood is like this contestation in terms of thinking about social movements and space and occupying space. So one thing that was happening a lot was just like stickering. My sticker book's there if people want to take a look afterwards. But the idea of like trying to actually counter that base building that was happening by a lot of these far-right groups. Again, not sure if that was successful. So graffiti on the streets and being reactive to far-right graffiti on the streets. So that was one of the main things. This is like stuff, I mean, this is definitely not as nice as Josh's kiss, you know, but it was like we had our groups where as soon as we would spot something, we'd have to go there and try and like exit out as fast as possible. So this is like we had our own neighborhoods that we were taking over to try and like erase fascist graffiti. Exhaustion. So while all this is happening, and many other things, and I was trying to keep it focused, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I was also a person of color working within an anarchist space that was primarily white for a long time, along with many others, but not enough. And so this is, I think, in 2019 at the Montreal Anarchist Book Fair, in our BIPOC space where we're trying to unpack issues in terms of like how we felt, yeah, in that space. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm pointing towards it around thinking through aesthetics of representation of what anti-fascism might look like in our eyes. We put this out in 2015. My friend Sophie and myself and other, as part of a collective called Artivistic, which is represent fuck white supremacy. This is the happiness issue, and it was about, I love this, exhaustion in the political economy of happiness. So this is stuff we were feeling, you know, for a long time before even the events that we're showing in terms of the confrontations with the far right. So just, yeah, you know, this is a poster that I did with a collective I organized with Stefan called Howl, and we can see how it was like tagged over by a bunch of Franco supremacists. This is a sign that was taped to Sophie's father's condo door about, he's not Chinese, by the way, but yeah. And other things that younger folks are being told in school. And yeah, basically, I was like, okay, maybe we also just want to do this. Oh yeah, right after, okay. Jumping a little bit ahead, going back to fashion, and thinking about normalization, right? So we looked at all these confrontations that were happening on the street against people that were mobilizing for free speech, against immigrants, et cetera. The CAC came into power, enacted Law 21. For people that don't know Law 21, it was a law that was banning all religious garments in any quote-unquote official positions within the state, but basically an attack on Muslim women. Which was basically this kind of normalization of the fascist tendencies of the groups like Pegida, La Meute, Storm Alliance. Obviously, they weren't happy with how far it didn't go, but we saw this as this kind of shift from, you know, fascist movement building to an actual establishment of I don't want to throw around the word fascist lightly, so to what we have now in terms of our governance structure. But we can think about what are typical fascist tactics once they're installed within power, so like attacks on education, blah, 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 and all these other things. We can think about the tuition hike for out-of-province students, what that's doing to this very institution itself. And with this is shot, for those that know Montreal well, this is shot at the Orange Julep, which is like a typical meeting space for a lot of suburban BIPOC folks. And so we wanted to claim this and kind of push forward in thinking in terms of like joy and happiness within our resistance. So the notion of like militant joy. And this brings me to other groups that I was working with at the time that are far from being explicitly anti-fascist, but are doing that kind of like infrastructural community building work, right? And so this is Brick by Brick, a community housing initiative and community development initiative. And they're run by, my dear friends who are also, in the other photos. And we can think of this as like in terms of aesthetics. So this was like the visual identity / brand guidelines established for them. Leonora, who recently passed away, so RIP Leonora. But we can talk about how do these graphics look like those first graphics, or how do they not? And in my mind, they're two sides of the same coin. This is the result, right? So we have a new building happening. Not we, see, I love to take claim for it, but Faiz is a really good friend of mine. But there's a new building that is being built in Park X, social housing. It's actually happening, and I can't even say how proud I am, how proud I am of that initiative, knowing where it came from in terms of the types of organizing that we were doing before, knowing the type of feelings that we were going through as we were putting out that Fuck White Supremacy zine. These are just some images from Brick by Brick events. And if we can just like stop and think about, let's say, the black block in front of the pizza, right? And just try and reconcile how these things are working together. Finally, it's scary out there, it's sad. Don't let the fuckers get you down. Fill your Molotov cocktails with flowers. And fuck white supremacy. Thank you.
Check. All right, thank you for everyone for coming out. Thank you to Sandy, Josh, and Kevin. This was so nourishing, so generative. I feel like I'm overwhelmed, and in terms of being the person who is supposed to moderate questions, I wanted to first just pose a more general question, and then after that, perhaps open it up to the audience, take a cluster of questions, and then we can move it, if that's okay. Perhaps, okay. Perhaps is always a good agitation. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing, and I think what is key to me is, there's a famous saying of there would be no social theory if there was no social movement, and I think for you, there's no social design without social movement. And I think there's a kind of sociality that you've been emphasizing that has to be congealed in these images. And what I like is that you don't agree, right? There's some friction perhaps, but there's definitely a kind of heterogeneity in the way that you demand people to relate to the images you're making. And for me, it's like, okay, first there's the image, but it's also the material. You're all very different, and I think how you approach material. Maybe you have a love for a particular tradition, in a radical tradition and its relation to, whether it be stickers, whether it be large banners, whether it be the kind of foam hands, which is a different kind of tradition, right? And I think I'm curious in terms of just asking, a more materialist question. What do you feel when you are approaching a design in terms of the radical traditions that you're drawing from, like maybe like a cassette tape or like a more like screen print versus going in front of a computer, versus a kind of radical futures that you're also imagining as you're producing, as you're making these kinds of designs, especially when you're trying to relate it to these larger, or maybe more local communities, but also larger communities.
Thank you all for sticking around, because I know we all went a little bit long. I'm going to just try and answer quickly, because I think it is an interesting question. Because I did grow up actually like designing on a computer. I'm one of the like kind of first full-on digi generation kids, you know? So I remember talking to Josh, or writing a little post online on social media when I was invited to join Just Seeds, and about how like I had always revered the fact that they worked with like real ink and real paper, because like all the stuff I did was either like, it wasn't even, I couldn't even offset it because it was like for a small scale. So I would just go to the copy shop and print things digitally, whereas they made like art. And I was like, whoa, I made it to the big leagues when that happened. But then I kind of also realized that those kind of material conditions don't actually apply to, they don't actually suit my work the best, you know? So I don't know, there's this tense thing, and I don't know if this is taking it too far right now, but like, I definitely believe in the importance of that material exchange that happens, and I think that's where the relational is, and that's why I started with that idea of like, we still need to start with the sensory, we still need to start with the embodied, we still need to start with that person handing the person the other thing, or the person sticking the sticker up, or the person tearing the sticker down, because that's another thing too. So yeah, the material considerations are like super important, but I don't think I start there necessarily. I don't know if that answered the question.
I mean, I think in our own ways, we all start with the social, and then the material follows that in some ways. So like the example of the t-shirt, the material in a way became the, embodied the social that was necessary. The social was that people wanted to learn how to screen print. The result of that was that we had the t-shirts we needed, but the actual, that was, it almost became secondary, even though it was the prompt for the action. But the action itself of collectively learning how to print together became the real project. And that I think part of the important thing is like, what is the social goal? And then what are the formal things that will help to get you to that social goal?
Well, I think, I mean, when I started, I was like totally, how do you say, paper was my fetish. So I was really into books and, you know, and I think that's what we shared when we got to know each other, like exchanging these things. Like when we meet, we show off to each other, and that's a lot related to printed matter. But I agree on what Kevin and Josh just said. It's really more about the social, and then the media follows. So and also concerning so that applies for the media, for the material, but even to a certain extent to the aesthetics, because it's really more what our designs enable in a specific social context, and rather what we as artists or designers or not artists and designers like personally. That's private, you know. I like a lot of things, but that's my thing, right? So even though we want to bring beauty into this world at the same time, of course, but that's really a personal thing. So yeah.
Just quickly to jump off. Oh wait, what was I going to say? No, yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing that, okay, because of the space that we're in, and I think there's also been this push around, you know, like social design practices and you know, social innovation and this type of language, which is like facilitating a lot of the work that sometimes I do. But I think one of the big questions that I have around it, I think the examples that we've both shown, is like, what does participatory design actually mean, right? And where even though, for example, we're highlighting the process, there's sometimes when like people start being like, oh, the process needs to be designed, right? And I'm not saying we don't do that, right? But at this point, like there's always this idea of like, how do we I just really like the fact that you were saying, they didn't really actually want to learn how, to contribute into the actual visual design of the image. They didn't care about that. They wanted to be able to manufacture and produce things at scale, And I think sometimes we forget to ask those actual questions. And whenever we have to be especially around maybe more governmental stuff, it's it has to be engaged in a participatory design process, meaning everyone has to have input on what color is going to go into the logo, And it's such a surface level material question that isn't actually the real question, So I just wanted to focus on that a little bit.
No, I mean, I really actually appreciate that idea of, like you said in your presentation, like Kevin said in his presentation, the idea of social, sensory experience, but also just the process of having putting the foam hand, that interaction, the stickering, or at least handing out the stickers. There is a kind of sociality, social experiments that are happening that seem to create, or even just, these gatherings that are outside of the pictures that you're showing, right? It's always compelling in outside of the frame, because it seems like you're showing a kind of history of your work, obviously, but outside of the frame, there's all these kinds of experiments happening, right? And that's what I find really compelling about this as a form of anti-fascism, which gives you an image, and whatever's in the image is what it demands you to understand it as a homogeneous idea, message, whatever. But it seems like the way you're presenting your relation to design, your relation to the kind of social movements that you're attached to, have love for, it seems like it is something that is about this thing that's outside of the frame, outside of the design. Does that make sense? But it's also the reason why the design is produced. Yeah.
I mean, I think that materiality becomes even more increasingly important as, Sandy references it in the thing is that if we're going to call the moment we're in a fascism, it's a techno-fascism. Like Hitler had Leni Riefenstahl. Radio. And but Trump has X and Meta and Google, and these are not neutral tools. And so we all are just bombarded with tech propaganda all day long, not just advertisements for, cryptocurrencies, and for, sports betting and for whatever other things going on. But inside the apps that we're using, we're being both directly and indirectly targeted with propaganda for how tech is the solution to all of our problems. And so I think as part of the sociality of the process is about also training ourselves and the people we work with, that us actually talking to each other rather than being on a Zoom screen makes a difference, is really important. And more important every day, because the change we want needs to not be on the screen. It needs to be in the world. It needs to be here. And so there's a sort of yes, we have to use technology, but we also need to make sure that technology is not using us, or not using us as much as possible.
Just to quickly reply, I know we don't have much time left, but I think you're bringing up some stuff that really is on my mind a lot in terms of technology. But I think one thing because there's a few points when you guys were speaking, and I think just to tie some things together too to this idea, Josh, we create a mass of images. I think, Sandy, I appreciate that you just showed this kind of entire body of work, right? And the meaning is not entire, a selection of your body of work, and a drop in, and we maybe focus on specific projects or whatever, but the meaning is not in each individual image. I think the meaning is in the collective kind of, if we want to use this fancy word, the collective platform that is being built through the types of social relations that are facilitated by the material acts that you're doing. I think that's really, really interesting. I think that's the same for, Josh, you're so prolific, on Just Seeds, everything's coming out all the time. I'm slightly less prolific because I'm teaching now, but that idea of not placing even though we use these images and they're singular images and they're repeated, and we want them to be socially reproduced at scale to a certain extent, it's also never really about that one image at all, right? It's about the body of work that tells that story, the body of my work that connects the sex workers' rights struggles that I've contributed to the like anti-gentrification movements that I've done, to the decriminalization stuff, et cetera. And I would just say the flip side of that is that the platforms are operating on the same way, where it's never about the individual like ad of whatever or the individual post that might be even like something coming your friend. It's the aggregate work of these kind of technological platforms that are eroding our ability to organize. I mean, that's my opinion. But so like trying to like see the platform rather than what's on the platform, I think is a really, really important thing, even when we see that in a positive sense in terms of like seeing the overall organizing model and production model rather than the individual piece of work.
Yeah, I would love to disagree. No, I think we agree on a lot of things, and we disagree on certain image politics and sometimes on certain designs and the meaning of certain designs. And that's actually, to quarrel about these things, it's something very productive. But I'm not sure, I still, there have been several waves of skepticism of what an image can actually do, what certain aesthetics, the flood of images, and now we see AI, the flood of images. I try to stick to this old quote, which I showed you guys today from Vincent Perrotet. I still believe in the social power of images. I'm touched by images in the right moment. It might be that the other person next to me is not touched by this image, but and Josh showed this image, somebody made this embroidery or took one of his images, and that's our payment basically, right? That's why we do this. And that's but on the other hand, so I think we are also humble. I think we share this also because I believe I can speak for the three of us. We live in a society where the majority of people are not even asked about their opinion, and we are in the power to speak, right? To articulate and to describe what this world is about or to criticize it. So that comes with a lot of responsibility. And yeah, I think that's another thing we have in common. Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah. Can we take like a couple questions? Oh, okay. If folks have, okay, just one? Any other? Okay, so we're just going to take two quick questions and then we'll have the panel.
So much of the authoritarian turn today has to do with demonization, and of course, demonization and representation go hand in hand. Also surveillance technologies, facial recognition and so on. And of course, reframing anything can really totally change the meaning. Doesn't have to be a binary change. Also, of course, you're very aware that the right expropriates any left practice for it to use that, and they're getting better and better at that, I think. But in terms of demonization, and especially of activists, when I'm thinking of, for example, facial recognition technologies, is there anyone working on graphic efforts to counter demonization?
Thank you. And then
Thank you for your presentations. I had a question about relating to like the materiality of design, which I think you all made really important points about. I'm also wondering about like the sort of sustainability aspect of that, and if you have any like sense of where your work, well, it's like the image that you've produced and then people taking that image and putting it onto material, and kind of if you have any sense of how that material travels after its use in protests, for example, and yeah, like I think it could be cool to have those materials as forms of archives and documentation, but just wondering if you have any idea of like what happens to those materials after they're done or used in protests. Yeah.
okay, one more.
It'll be quick. Thanks for your talks and presentations. Josh, I just want to reference something that you have talked about recently, which is the tension between organizing and activism. And I think there's a discussion to be had there also in terms of process and in terms of how collective image making and also like collective kind of like graphic creation, whether it's posters or banners, takes place in an organizing context. And I know that in New York City, that conversation is quite deep, but maybe less so here. So I think it'd be really interesting to sort of hear your thoughts about tensions between those frameworks of activism and organizing. And it also speaks to some of the broader points that were brought up by everybody around screens and platforms that were very insightful. Thank you.
Okay, 5 minutes? Okay.
What happens to all that stuff? It ends up under my bed. No, I mean, I'm very invested in that question, and I didn't talk about it at all today, but I helped start a space in Brooklyn called Interference Archive, which is a public-facing storefront archive, library and social center, all rooted in the collecting and sharing and recirculation of the culture produced by social movements. So we collect posters and buttons and t-shirts and banners and newspapers and record albums and moving image and little bits and pieces of all the kinds of stuff that people make, with the idea that it's an open stacks archive. So anyone can come in off the street, pull boxes down, open flat file drawers and look at this stuff, scan it, take photos of it, bring those ideas back out into the world, that this is like a living, breathing culture, and that it should be treated as such. And to do that, we need access to it. So we need to kind of get it out of our closets and put it into places where it can be shared. And then in terms of activism and organizing, I mean, what Stefan and I were talking about, and I think you have some housing, similar experiences with housing, like in terms of, I don't know, I'll say something very controversial. Although I would consider myself an abolitionist, I find the popularization of the term abolition in the kind of facile attention economy that we exist in to oftentimes be more harmful than helpful. Because what happens is people are like, oh, I'm an abolitionist. And then I feel good about myself because I have the right politics, and then I don't actually have to engage in the nitty gritty and complexity of what it really takes to get people out of cages. And that often means working with people that you don't like. It means negotiating with power structures. It means making decisions about the realistic limits to what your power is and what you can accomplish with that power, and then claiming that territory, solidifying yourself in order to claim more. And I think that in the context of New York City, oftentimes what's happened is, for instance, like those fists that I made when, you know, the City Council of New York City passed a bill in order to demand to set the timeline for the closure of Rikers. There were dozens of formerly incarcerated people in the chamber demanding that they pass that bill with those foam fists on their hands. Meanwhile, there are activists outside who had locked themselves to the gates demanding that they don't pass that thing, because part of the reality of decarceration is that we don't live in a world in which the vast majority, or even a minuscule majority, believe in abolition. And so people were like, this doesn't go far enough, so we want to stop it from happening. This is the thing, like reform, revolution, it's hundreds of years of debate around this question, and I think we're reaching these acute points where organizing strategies and activist strategies are coming in conflict.
No, I agree. I mean, We exactly had the same discussion. I mean, I don't have to add up. We have a lot of examples in Berlin where we had conflicts in the housing movement, where the activists, we were like compromising. We made a referendum, for instance. We sat down with the government because they, threatened us to push us off the street with the referendum, and this would cause a lot of work. And the activists said, you can't compromise, But I was there for my neighbors, for my tenants, for my poor neighbors, and every penny helps, right? So there's a conflict here, So you might be kind of like selling off to the politicians in this situation, but it's actually a concrete impact on the purse at the end of the month. So that's a structural conflict, right? So, yeah, but as Josh just said, it has been going on ever since. It's the conflict between reform and revolution. It's just peaked.
I'll just quickly respond to some of these things. I mean, I totally agree. I think I was also trying to get at some of those issues in terms of looking at the different types of projects that, I've been involved with and feeling that conflict within myself, all the time, all the time. Just quickly on, there was a question around like surveillance and
the conflict, I just briefly touched on a housing question in Berlin between the activism and the revolution and the more, reform politics here. Well, the radical side actually learned from it. So, because they later understood that referendums are a very powerful tool. So the same people who criticized me and others that we compromised 5 years earlier were one of the core activist groups who started off the biggest revolution, I'm saying already, a referendum, sorry. So there's a learning process on both sides, So I don't think that one or the other is right, but it's a mutual learning process. And people always, don't take enough time to really sit down to understand from where people are coming from and what they're aiming to. So urgent things need time, like this event today.
maybe we should just end on that. We're out of time. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you again, Sandy, Josh, Kevin, Dark Opacities. Shout out to Fourth Space. Shout out to CISC. Thank you again. Yeah, be well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for these wonderful presentations. And of course, we know that this conversation could go on for days, so hopefully you will come back and we will get to ask more lovely questions. Thank you, everyone. We're going to be closing up the Zoom, and this conversation may be available at a later date. So for those of you on Zoom, we'll wish you a good day. Those of you in the space, we're going to be closing up in actually just 5 minutes. So get on over and see those zines on your way out. Everybody have a great day and a great afternoon.